All right, I think we are live. Good afternoon or good morning to depending on where you are. Hello from the past. If you're watching or recording of this, appreciate you downloading. Really excited. We've got a really good topic today to talk about today. We've got some great speakers from Sophos and Veeam. So I'll kick us off here and we'll get started. So my name is Eric Kokonis, VP of Product Marketing and Analyst Relations here at Sophos. And I'm very excited to have two great guests. We got Ray Heffer, Field CISO for Veeam, and Dave Mareels, Senior Director of Product Management from Sophos. So before we get into it, a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use that handy Q&A box. We'll be keeping an eye on it throughout. We might answer a couple questions as we're going through things, but otherwise we're going to have some time at the end. Once we have Ray and Dave chat a little bit, we'll have some time at the end for some open Q&A. So don't be shy. Please put your questions out there. We've got two folks who can answer a lot of information, everything that you could possibly want to know about ransomware, attacker techniques and procedures, and the importance of having really strong backup technology as well as really strong detection and response technology or services. We are going to be recording today's session, as I mentioned, so be on the lookout for an email toward the end of this week where we'll have a link to that recording. And yeah, with that, we'll get started. So Ray, Dave, really appreciate you guys joining. Would love for you guys to introduce yourselves. Ray, we'll start with you.
Great. Yeah. So, my name is Ray Heffer. I'm a field CISO for Veeam, as was mentioned. It's an interesting role. It has Chief Information Security Officer in the title, but there's field in front of it. So I love it. I get to speak to customer CISOs almost every single day. In terms of my cybersecurity experience, I've been around a while, started in the mid-90s. And I think I'm going to share a fun fact. Exactly 24 years ago, almost to the day, was the I love you virus. And that was my first cybersecurity incident, if you want to put it that way. It ages me a bit, so I won't share anymore.
I love that. You always remember your first virus. That's a saying.
For sure.
I think. Yeah. Dave, great to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. It's good to be here. Thanks for dialing in. Dave Mareels. I'm Senior Director in Product Management here in the SecOps part of the business within Sophos. So looking after all things managed services, MDR and managed risks, vulnerability management as a service from a product point of view. I've been in Sophos for 2 years. So prior to that, I was having fun in startup world. So I was a co-founder and CEO of a small startup called SocOS, which was sort of a SIM/SOAR proposition, doing all things, making sense of data, cleaning data, correlating data, escalating that data to analysts. And Sophos acquired that technology, and that's now under the hood, powering our XDR and our MDR technology. So I'm well placed to talk about all things, and very apt for this webinar, about all things. How do you take interesting data and how do you make it sing and dance, and how do you make it ultimately provide a really good outcome for our customers? So good to be here.
Very good. Yeah, thank you both. And I hate situations like this where I have decidedly the lamest accent of this group. You both are bringing much more fun accents to the table. And probably a lot more knowledge. So first thing that I wanted to cover. So both of our organizations, Veeam and Sophos, we do a lot of research, proprietary research. We do constantly monitoring the threat landscape. And one of the tactics that we're seeing emerging with greater velocity is attackers who are executing ransomware, and they're doing it by first corrupting backup repositories. And so from our recent, earlier this month, we released our 2024 Sophos State of Ransomware report. I'm going to read a couple stats from that. So 66% of organizations were hit by ransomware in the last year. 66% hit by ransomware. So the vast majority, if you're playing the odds, the likelihood that you're going to get hit by ransomware is more likely than not. Of those who got hit with ransomware, 94% said the attacker attempted to compromise the company's backups during the attack. 94%. And in 57% of those attempts, they were successful, right? So that's massive. So 66% hit with ransomware, 94% the attacker was trying to compromise or tamper with the backup repository, and in 57%, they were successful in doing so. So Ray, I want to start with you. How do these findings align with what you're hearing in the field when you're talking to customers? How prevalent is this? What are you hearing from organizations?
Yeah, it's quite staggering when you say it that way. But we actually have our own research, and it aligns pretty much. You're spot on there. We have our own ransomware trends report. The new one for 2024 is due out next month, so look out for that. But I can say, if you look at the previous year, you've hit the nail on the head. And I think what really concerns me is we are hearing more and more about this. That 94% is, there's not much more room to go up, but is that going to hit 100%? But interestingly, what I've started seeing as well is not just to corrupt or delete the backup. That you may have heard of this saying, living off the land, where threat actors will use existing tools, protocols, processes in an organization. Why bring in a specific tool when the organization already has it? We're seeing backups being used, or backup software being used to exfiltrate data as well. And that's something I'm watching carefully, because it really does concern me that the data exfiltration, again, rather than bringing in some complex process, there's a tool called DNS-CAT, and it hides that within DNS traffic. They're trying to go undetected. Well, hey, what better way of doing that is to use the backup software, perhaps with a compromised admin account, to remain undetected. So that's another area that I'm also watching, because, as well as deleting the backups, we've got to look at, are they sending that backup to, say, a compromised Amazon S3 target or something along those lines? So, it's certainly concerning.
Yeah, Ray, I'm gonna ask you too. So, some of our viewers, maybe they're not familiar with why attackers are doing this. Certainly, if you're in security operations, you know exactly why. But maybe you have to explain this to someone on your executive team. Why are attackers targeting backup repositories? What's the purpose of doing that as a tactic?
Well, obviously, the number one primary reason they want to do that is they want their ransom to be successful. It's no good if they do all this, put all this effort in, encrypt all your data, and then you say, okay, thanks, and then you just recover from the previous night's backup. So obviously, one of the first things they want to do, and they are actively looking for Veeam and other backup software vendors to go straight to that and make sure that their ransom is going to be successful. But on the exfiltration side as well, they want to get that data out as quickly as they can. And the reason for that is what we call double extortion. So extortion number one, we've encrypted everything. And by the way, your backups have been deleted. So you've got to pay us some crypto to recover that. Then number two, that's been exfiltrated. It's now on some website on Tor or Telegram or wherever it ends up. There's forums out there. And that data is public. And this is why, as well, I'm very passionate about this. One of my pet projects, or passions, I should say, is privacy. This is my data. It's your data. We hear all the time about healthcare. I'm not going to mention names, but it's in the news now. There's healthcare records, and we're talking millions and millions out there. So for the ransomware threat actor, whatever you want to call them, for them to be successful, not just encrypting, not just making sure you can't recover, but also the double extortion of making that public. And they're going to say, and this actually happened fairly recently, I think in February, back in my hometown in England, where I'm from originally, there was a water utility company, and this happened to them. They had to pay a second ransom because they made 276,000 customer records public. This is in the UK, but we're seeing this time and time again. And there's also triple extortion, where a funny story. There's other two things. They do a DDoS attack on the organization, which is a dynamic sort of denial of service. They take down their services and then say, you've got to pay us again if you want your services back. And it's not funny, but I have to chuckle. There was a situation where the threat actor threatened to report the organization to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, because they would have missed the 4 days deadline to report this material breach. It's crazy. I don't want to keep everyone awake at night, but this is the sort of thing I'm tracking.
So a year from now, when we regroup for another webinar, are we going to be talking about quadruple extortion?
Right. It's heading that way.
Thank you for that overview, Ray. That's really helpful. Just kind of put it in context. Why are attackers doing this? And because for a long time, it was one of the best defenses you could have really solid backups. If your files get encrypted, restore from backup, you're back in business in no time. But attackers are obviously aware of that, and they're going to target those backups to increase the likelihood that you're going to pay that ransom. And as we've seen, ransom payouts have been increasing for years and years and years now, which is another alarming trend. So really, really helpful. There's another thing I'm going to earmark for a topic a little bit later on. You mentioned living off the land attacks, right? Attackers who are using legitimate tools, the types of tools that an admin might be using in an environment that are especially difficult to detect because they're not inherently malicious tools, but they can be used in malicious ways. And we'll talk a little bit about how that creates complications from a detection and response standpoint. Before we get to that, though, so we kind of jumped into the problem, and both Sophos and Veeam, we solve, well, individually, we solve different problems, but we're talking about the integration today. So I do want to start with Veeam. How do you guys solve this problem? What are some of the things that you do to help customers? And then Dave, I'll go to you and ask you the same thing. What are some of the things that people invest in Sophos for, from products and services and everything else? So Ray, maybe just give us an overview. Like what's kind of Veeam's special sauce here in the backup and recovery space?
Yeah, and I'll keep this one fairly concise, and I can go into more detail if needed. I think, first of all, we have this ability to do what we call immutable backups. So that's making sure that those backups cannot be tampered with, can't be deleted, can't be changed. They're solid. But on top of that, and I always love to use this analogy, back in the 80s, I loved the movie War Games. At the beginning of that movie, there was an officer at opposite corners of the room, and they both had to turn this key to launch a missile. Well, we have something very similar. We're not launching missiles, don't worry, but it's called Four Eyes protection. So basically, it needs two admins to carry out a function. And this is really important because you've got to assume that you have a threat on the network. And sorry, I've got a call coming through. Yeah, you've got to assume you've got a threat on the network. But by having perhaps a compromised admin, if you have to have two admins now to create, exfiltrating data, deleting data, corrupting that backup, now you really are lowering the chances that you're going to have two compromised admins. Probably not. So yeah, the immutability and the Four Eyes protection are just some features, but there's a whole, I won't go too deep into the product, but there's other areas as well where we even have our own threat intelligence as well, and hence our ransomware protections report, which comes out next month.
Excellent. Thank you, Ray. And we'll work on getting Matthew Broderick on for the next webinar. That way
that would be awesome.
That's a War Games reference for those who weren't alive or cognizant in the 80s, Dave. So let's go into Dave. So tell us a little bit about Sophos. We've got products, we've got services. Tell us a little bit about how we do things.
Yeah, absolutely. So real security company first is really the ethos. Where we started was AV, if you like, back in the late 80s in Abingdon, Oxford. We're probably close to where Ray's from originally. Yeah. But that's where it started, right? A good endpoint protection. Fast forward today, it's a very different beast, right? We have 600,000 customers globally using a plethora of our portfolio of products. So it's not just an endpoint. We have a nice platform, XDR, firewalls, email, CDR, the whole lot, and a really great service layer as well. So managed detection and response. How we think about it, so wearing my product hat now, we've talked about the problem, we've talked about ransomware. How we look at this of how do I build innovative products and services that combats and protects and gives a good outcome for our customers. We look at it in four pillars, right? There's protection. Protection's always, you'll hear us bang on about this. Protection first. If you can protect it. You're not going to get 100% hit rate. You just can't do it. So if you can't do 100%, what's the fallback? Detection. So get really good detection. How do we think about building detection, not just from the endpoint, but across all telemetry planes and security control points, which very apt for this discussion, which we'll get into the details later. Investigate. So once I've done protection, once I've done a really good detection across the security control points, how do I then do a really nice data visualization layer? How do I get a really good investigation capability? And then how do I respond? Right? You got to complete the cycle. How do I block something? How do I isolate a device? How do I delete a file? Terminate a process. And so we think about it in those four pillars, and then we think about it from a products and services point of view. So I want to do protection, detection, investigation, and response, and I want to package that up into a platform. So Sophos XDR for an MSP or an MSSP, or for an underlying customer to use as their security control, their security protective monitoring solution. Or MDR. So how do I do all of that within the XDR platform, but then how do I put a really awesome managed service layer on top? And of course, what we're talking about here is ransomware. That's very much where this whole thing started, was protect ransomware at all costs. So we do a lot of innovation around, say, our endpoint, active adversary protection. So it's dynamic configuration where we think someone's on the box before a ransom's detonated. quickly, dynamically change your policies and your configurations to buy time, because time is of the essence in this case. We have remote ransomware capability, which you're reading a little bit about that today. Remote ransomware, so it's not weird processes happening on the box, but it's sort of remote file access and encrypting the files on the network, which will go undetected by a regular AV. So we're putting a lot of investment in protection, but then obviously around the other 3 layers, which I spoke about, and then wrapped in an XDR product for self-service or managed by us, MDR. In a nutshell, Eric.
Really, really good. Appreciate that, Dave. And one of the things that you both talk about was that kind of defense in depth, having multiple layers of defense. We're going to have multiple things that are going to be used to prevent, detect, and respond to threats. Because, I mean, the thing with attackers is they're constantly changing, right? All the cybersecurity stuff would be pretty easy if you had a static adversary who didn't change what they were doing. But we have an intelligent adversary who is constantly changing the tactics and techniques. So you kind of address one thing and they're off doing another thing. So you have to have this multiple layers of protection, detection, and tools to investigate, and then ultimately be able to respond. And many organizations, this is something that can be difficult for them to have. Maybe they don't have someone who's full-time dedicated to cybersecurity. In fact, Ray, how often do you come into contact with organizations where they don't have a CISO, right? You're basically, they're borrowing you as their CISO for a little bit and getting insights from you. Maybe they don't have anyone dedicated full-time to security. That's been something that's been put on someone who's primarily responsible for IT, and now they have this whole other beast that they have to manage. What's your experience in that?
Yeah, for sure. We see that. Obviously, the smaller organizations, I'm not going to mention names. There's one utility company that had the IT person for everything. Security, they wore many hats. And I've been there, I was in a similar role, decades ago now. But today, what concerns me is a number of things really to unpack here. I think, first of all, look at the threat actor for a moment. They're starting to work together. And I'll give you an example. And I make this mistake all the time. When we think of a hacker, I think of someone in their late teens, early 20s. Perhaps they're living in the basement of their parents' house. And that's actually true in some respects. Scattered Spider, they consist of a group in the UK and the US. They've been, the most notable is MGM, Caesars Palace, but they're very good at social engineering. What's interesting is they've gained some notoriety now from the Russian threat actors. So on the opposite end of that spectrum, and you can I choose that word on purpose, that you have Sandworm, for example. They're part of the Russian military intelligence. So, but what concerns me, they're going to start working together now for organizations that maybe have a temporary CISO, a VCISO, or part-time CISO, or no CISO at all. They just have the IT person in this extreme case I gave. You've got to start sharing. Any CISO I talk to be honest, today, I'm surprised if they don't have this, and that's that black book of other chief information security officers, other contacts that they can call and share battle scars in this. You've got to come back to this premise. It's not if, it's when. And I've got people I can call if there's a situation. And I think what works in our favor is the community is fantastic. But if you look at the solutions out there, you mentioned antivirus, there's IDS, IPS, there's firewalls. You've probably seen those slides before where there's just thousands of company logos all over it. This isn't going to work unless we start working together. And I think this is why I'm so excited about Veeam and Sophos, because it's just an amazing demonstration of how that works together. So I think for the IT manager, the CISO, whoever it is responsible for security, they need to have folks they work with and share experiences. And unfortunately, I do see organizations that have a ransomware attack and they don't want to make that public. They keep it to themselves. But that's another problem, because you're not going to learn from that. It's going to happen again.
Yeah, and that is the perfect segue, right? That's why our two groups wanted to come together, Sophos plus Veeam, because we're like, we both have state-of-the-art solutions. With Sophos MDR, we have the leading MDR service in the world, and our objective is to make sure that we can plug into world-class tools so that we can expand our visibility, detect things sooner, see things that you might be more difficult to see until it's too late. So that's perfect. So let's get into that a little bit. The union of Sophos and Veeam. I'm going to pull up a quick visual aid here, and Dave, I'm going to ask you to kind of describe what does this integration look like? How does it work?
Yeah, great. So this is all, and Eric summed it up perfectly. He used the word is visibility. Okay, so this is around Veeam having critical telemetry across a very critical attack surface pathway, and it's about us getting that rich telemetry into our machine for better for detection and for better investigation and response. So fundamentally, what we're talking about is getting an enhanced visibility into our XDR platform for someone to use it and to investigate and respond themselves, or getting that visibility into our MDR teams such that they can then do some further hunting, some further investigation on top of all the other data that's in the data lake. So that's the first summary of this slide. It's getting visibility from the backup and recovery space via Veeam. And now this is all made possible by Veeam's new venture into, say, the security analytics game, would you say, Ray? Your 12.1, your new analytics pack you've just launched, which has its own, I think of it as like the SIM for the backups, right? These guys have built a really nice piece of software, analytical capability that is looking for all sorts of nefarious activity taking place on the backups. Not just nefarious things like ransomware detected or malicious or malware detected on the backup server, but things like high risk potential misconfigurations or security controls, so such as disabling MFA, global disable MFA. Veeam is now detecting that, and it's detecting that, and it's sending it into the Sophos XDR and MDR machine. And what you can see on the screen here is a bunch of telemetry that Veeam will actually produce and come into our SOCs. Yeah, Eric, on that slide, perfect. So backup repository was deleted. We have MFA disabled. We have ransomware marked as clean. All of this great security analytics capability coming off Veeam via syslog into our machine, such that we can then have the nice detection pipeline at the back end that will take that and correlate it with other signals. We'll have case creating analytics for us to then trigger human-led investigations to then provide a great outcome for our customer. So think of this as visibility coming from Veeam into our SOC, and then having a human in an MDR front, do that next step, that triage, that investigation, and ultimately stop an attacker in their tracks. This is what this is all about. And if you think about the signals and the visibility, I always give the physical security analogy. You've got lasers, you've got CCTV, you've got locks on all your doors and windows. You want to make sure you get coverage from all potential vulnerable points, right? And it's the same thing with the digital environment here. Up until now, we didn't have a signal coming off a Veeam telemetry signal. So we potentially were blind with an attacker hitting an unmanaged device. And you saw today, right at the start, we talked about an attacker getting into an unmanaged device and going straight to the backups. Customers were potentially blind when that was happening. So this is about plugging a potential blind gap for our customers. And that's why we're really excited about it.
Yeah, really, really good summary, Dave. And one thing too that I'll point out, this integration works for if you're a Sophos XDR customer, meaning you are using our extended detection and response tool, and you're maybe managing security operations on your own. So you could be pulling in telemetry sources from endpoint, firewall, productivity, like with our integration with Microsoft. And now this is another point of telemetry that you can view. And as Dave said, it all goes into the same place. So one of the benefits of how the XDR engine works is it's ingesting all of these different data sources. And Dave, you could probably talk about how complicated it is, because every one of these detection sources displays things a little bit different, makes it a little bit more difficult from a technology standpoint to make sure everything is harmonious and that data can be combined. But that's exactly what we do. We do all that hard work for you, so we can take your data from your firewall, from your endpoint, from Microsoft, from Veeam, and correlate it together. And so instead of getting 50 alerts from 50 different sources, you're getting one single alert that's stacking together all the activities that are being seen as part of that one attack sequence. But if you're managing security by yourself or with a small team, it's going to make your workload much easier to manage.
Yeah. And I will say, this is not, it's me and Ray here. This is Veeam and Sophos. This is us working together with this. This is not us developing something in the back end with very little involvement with Veeam. Right? I sit down, it's probably twice a week. I'm with the Veeam product leaders and their engineering leaders to go, how do we get the most out of this integration? So rest assured for joint customers out there, right? This is us two working very hard on this together to go, looking at the data. Good detection is rooted in good understanding of the data layer, right? And cleaning that data, enriching that data. And Eric said, correlating with other signals. But that's not just Sophos doing that, right? That's us with Veeam together working very hard. And as and when Veeam are adding rules and adding new detection capability, they're picking up the phone to us and saying, we've added this stuff, go and update your rules in the back end. So this is a seamless machine working in harmony together as a true partnership for the ultimate benefit of our joint customers.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Ray said. It's almost like two CISOs, in this case, service providers, who are exchanging notes. Here's something that we're observing. We need to tune this alert here. So you're not just getting what you get out of the box on day one. You're getting the continued evolution and continued refinement and new detections as the attackers change their techniques. I mentioned before, I want to kind of circle back on a topic because, again, we talked about teams that might be stretched too thin, not enough people, too much work to be able to manage. And Ray, you brought up the technique of living off the land, which means that there's certain types of detections or alerts that are going to require a human to conduct an investigation, because we talk about protection technologies or prevention technologies. Sometimes they can't say, hey, this is something that's bad and we need to shut it down. Sometimes it's going to provide some context. This could be malicious or it could be a legitimate use, and we need a human to be able to assess the situation. So maybe, Dave, you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned investigation being one of the 4 pillars. How does that kind of play into this as well?
Yeah, so the events that come into the data lake, right? So you mentioned you clean them, you correlate them, it sits in the data lake. There's 2 real principal value adds that happen next. One, we're sucking in, and I wish I had it on top of the hand, but we've got hundreds of events coming from Veeam into our data lake. They sit there. It's rich telemetry. It's really valuable from an investigation point of view. So just think about the wider attacker, how they're doing, how they're achieving their objective. If we've got a bunch of data coming into our data lake, something that might trigger a human investigation might not have anything to do with Veeam. It might have come from our endpoint product. It might have come from Microsoft. It might have come from, say, a Palo Alto firewall. The first thing our analyst does to get investigation, and now if you're an XDR customer, this is what you would be doing, but our analyst will have playbooks and run books, and they will go in and say, right, let's pivot into the data lake where all of this customer's data live, their Veeam, their Palo, their Microsoft, their Sophos, and they start asking questions from that data and trying to piece the timeline together, trying to investigate. So that entire sort of where it started, what have they done with all the data that we have there. So the first use case is just helping with the enrichment, with the investigation for effective triage. So Veeam doesn't necessarily have to trigger a case, but just having it there in the first place is super valuable to understand the attack timeline and the attack picture, and to really start to understand what is this attacker trying to achieve, and then have a really effective remediation step because you understand that full picture. That's one part, the investigation, right? Having it there, enrichment and context. The next part is the actual case creating analytics. There are some really high fidelity events that will trigger a human-led, hands-on keyboard response from our analyst team coming directly from Veeam. So specific rules tailored, again, working closely with Veeam. Global MFA disable, ladies and gentlemen. You sure as hell want to make sure that we're probably looking at that. Like, why is someone doing a global MFA disable? So, and it probably ties in nicely with an example you'll see in a bit, but there are some other events. Ransomware detected or ransomware marked as clean, I believe, is another one. There's a handful. I think we come out of the gates with 6 or 7 case creating analytics that are very high fidelity signals that we will trigger a human investigation and conduct investigation and then reach out to the customer and do a response. But rest assured, it's not just going to stay 6 for forever. It's going to add. We're going to see more customers enable this. We're going to see, we've just gone live, right? Just a couple of months ago, already 100 or so customers enabled it. We're seeing data. We're getting feedback. We're working with Veeam. And you rest assured, we are going to add more case creating analytics, and we're going to get better at doing that investigation. And we're going to make it easier for our platform for people using our XDR to facilitate good, effective remediation and investigation within our platform as well if you're self-managing it.
Love that, Dave. Thank you, Ray. I want to get back to you. I want to get back to you because, again, as a field CISO, you're talking to customers all day, every day. In your view, and who's the right fit for this? Like, what are some of the attributes of an organization where you would be like, you know what, this is the right integration for you. You should really consider this.
Yeah, in fact, actually, while you got this slide up, I've been burning to say something. This on the left, this reminds me. You can imagine the traditional backup admin, the IT team that manage backups, and on the right hand side, Sophos is a security team. And that's actually a problem that we've seen, and we highlight in our own trends reports. In there's a disconnect at customers, that the security teams aren't talking to the IT operations teams. And I think, Dave, you touched on this. Instant response. If I wake up tomorrow morning and my phone is on fire because of a ransomware incident, first of all, I know I'm going to have a bad day. So I hope that doesn't happen. But secondly, I want to know that I have well-rehearsed instant response playbooks. I've done tabletop exercises within the organization, and this slide actually says it so well, bring that together. IT operations, security teams, let's bring them in. So in terms of who this is a good fit for, I'd say everybody. Our existing customers that maybe they've upgraded to 12.1, they've got these new features, or existing Sophos customer. This is so exciting because, as I said before, having that collaboration generally between CISOs, and we can't in the software and vendor industry have all these point solutions that don't collaborate. It's just not going to work. Look at the executive order, 3 years ago now, and we have zero trust mentioned there. There's 5 pillars, user, device, application, network, data. And that last data pillar, even the CISO who have the zero trust maturity model hand you over to NIST. And this is where I think the visibility that Dave talks about can break down in some organizations. Backups shouldn't be seen as this last line of defense, we'll recover that. And then you're panicking because you've had the ransomware and you're going to see if you can recover. Let's bring all this together. I can't emphasize how excited I am by this.
I love that, Ray. And I love the fact that you were the one who said it's for everyone. Because if I say that, like, I'm a marketing guy, of course, everyone should buy it, right? Like, people would expect that from me. It's great that
I'm going to call my mother after this back in the UK. I'm going to say, listen, you need this. Perhaps not that far, but
Awesome. Well, speaking of kind of use cases and situations where we've observed this, again, Dave, you mentioned we've got this in a couple hundred customer environments now, and we've only just recently made it available. We've already seen some interesting cases. So I'm going to pull up a case, a real case that we worked not too long ago, I think within the past week or two, and have you walk us through kind of what else happening here. So we've got this is an MDR case. So this is now where Sophos is providing MDR service, managed detection and response services on behalf of a customer. And we started detecting backup tampering, exactly that one of the types of things that we're able to see with this integration. So I'll let you pick it up from here with the bad slide here.
Yeah, the naughty red one. Yeah, exactly. So this is Veeam spotting, and as I said, the sim of the backup. Hope you don't mind saying that, Ray. Right? You've got your analytics firing, you're observing stuff, you're sending stuff to us. So once that data lands, what you're seeing on the screen here is receiving some events, some security alerts from Veeam on a particular customer, and we've received that. We've correlated them together, and we've got some events that say, hang on a second, we've got an event here, the highest score. So we're taking that score, we're doing standardization, we're adding score and intelligence as well in our data pipelines. But this one particular one comes up and says, we've got a high score here. And I've actually mentioned this. It's like you teed me up here, Eric. Perfect. Here's a global MFA disable on this customer's Veeam. We add the MITRE attack information as well. So we're enriching that as the data is coming in. And so possible defense evasion is taking place. Remember, these are all events that will trigger an investigation, but it's a possible until proven otherwise. So that's the step one. Events are received, it's triggered, and it lands on an analyst, a human analyst lap that says, you need to go and investigate this. This is potentially nefarious activity. So the backup device, right, is a server that's managed by Sophos. We have agent that's deployed there as well. And so guess what we do? We go and pivot. What did I say about the investigation step? The telemetry from Sophos XDR, our analyst is going to go and look at that Veeam telemetry, right? And it's going to also look at all the other things in the data lake for more clues. And in this case, Sophos MDR discovers this alert from Veeam, right, was due to MFA being disabled by this domain, this user, redacted user for this customer. The MDR analyst reviews the login events on the affected device. We have that telemetry and observes several successful logins from this user as well. So we've got some sort of domain user coming in, right, and then disabling. Sounds a bit dodgy. Next step, Eric. So the threat response comes in. So this is where we will reach out. So there's potentially a partner involved or direct to the customer. So we go straight to the customer, right? And this happens. We detect within a minute. We investigate within that 25. So an overall response time roughly of like 38 minutes is our global average. So this is happening rapidly. Sophos MDR requests. You go to the customer. We say, hey, we've detected this behavior. Go and confirm, right? And please report back to us about. Do we have to further investigate, or is this nefarious, or is this potentially you know about it? Is this potentially a pen test? Clue. And so that's what you see in the last sentence here. Customer confirms and says, this is indeed, we're doing a pen test. We were testing the integration. Well done on catching it. So a good example of from Veeam detecting something, coming into the SOC, our analyst pivoting, doing some triage, doing some investigation, and reaching out to the customer in a timely manner to say, hang on, there's something dodgy going on here, something wider and something more nefarious, but highlighting that to the customer and working them very much in a collaboration. In this case, I guess good news. Definitely we spotted it, but good news as well that it was a pen test and not something a little bit more nefarious.
Yeah, well, customers love when we catch their pen tests because that's the point. So even though this wasn't a malicious adversary, that's exactly and to your point too before, Ray. Doing testing, right? Doing tabletops, doing pen tests, making sure that everything is working correctly, so that when something bad is happening, something legitimately bad is happening, you've worked out all the kinks. You know how you're going to respond. You know who's going to respond and in what order. One thing I want to highlight, Dave, that you mentioned was. This entire sequence from detection to response took about 38 minutes. We love benchmark data. So we look to Gartner for their benchmark on this. And when their report found that when you look at organizations that have a dedicated security operations team, so we're not talking about organizations who maybe don't have anyone who's in charge of security, but ones that have a fully staffed SOC or security operations team, the median time to respond to a threat is 16 hours. So 16 hours versus 38 minutes. So you can see just how much faster, because we see this stuff every day, and we've got 500 plus people across the world who are eyes on glass looking at this stuff day in and day out, and they're equipped with tools that help accelerate every step of the investigative process. That's where I would normally say things like they're guided by AI, which they are, but it's become a marketing trope at this point. So I'm going to just move quickly past it. Really good stuff, Dave. Really appreciate you sharing that example. And we're going to have a lot more examples as we go. And I'm eager to see as we continue to add new capabilities, and as attackers adapt to this, we're going to have brand new cases, more interesting cases.
You saw, if I jump in, Eric, quickly, you this example was really trying to prove out that integration, right? But very much to educate the audience here what this actually, how it works. But that was a very Veeam to Sophos centric view, right? But back a few moments ago, we were talking about the wider investigation piece. I'm confident we're going to see a case that's going to trigger from a Sophos detection or from a Microsoft detection that we've spotted something weird on a Microsoft 365 event. We've then gone and investigated a user. And then we've gone to check that actually they've gone and they've actually reached the backup and they've logged on. They haven't disabled the global MFA, but they've reached the backups. At which point, incident response kicks in. We neutralize the threat. We would go out and say, customer, disable this user, reset the creds, ensure MFA is enabled. So you just saw it. You saw one bit of it. You saw Veeam generating stuff and us responding, and a pen test. Great value and a good validation of the integration itself. What you'll see, and what we do see with this, is a trigger from another source completely, back to the point about visibility and detection across the entire stack. Having that Veeam data tells that full picture. Without the Veeam integration, we sort of stop there, and we don't know whether they've tampered with backups. We don't have that visibility. So again, back to the fundamental message of this is providing really interesting telemetry, not just that we can trigger a case, but to widen and give us a wider view path of what an attacker is potentially doing, and therefore have a much more effective remediation and a more well-rounded remediation efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered kind of what's at stake here, the problem that we're facing with attackers who are after these backup repositories. We talked about how we came together, how Sophos and Veeam uniquely solved this challenge, as well as how we do it together through this integration, and we shared this use case. So I want to ask you both, any final thoughts, Ray? Any kind of final observations or things that you would recommend people consider coming off of this webinar?
Yeah, I think the thing that's for the forefront of my mind listening to you, Dave. There, I'm so glad you picked up on the fact that MFA was disabled. It's unfortunate, but we are seeing so much of that. I mentioned Scattered Spider. They go by many other names, Black Cat and various other names, but they are so good, whether it's social engineering or other methods of disabling MFA. And it really is, that's a real threat out there. And the fact that you can pick that up, because obviously they are targeting backups. So that's, I think, a fantastic example. But also, we are seeing today workloads are shifting. We've had, I'm former VMware. VMware is now acquired by Broadcom, and workloads are changing platforms to the cloud, other cloud providers, and our solutions operate on all of those. So, this is, I think, even more important. It doesn't, it's not 15 years ago, it was just Veeam was virtual machine backups. We operate everywhere. And you mentioned M365. You name it, we'll have backups there, and Sophos integration. So I think that's an important point to make as well.
Yeah, really good point. Dave, anything else you would add before we get into Q&A?
I think I'd reiterate, it's about visibility. Good detection, good investigation, good response is fundamentally a data problem, right? And this is all about this integration, right? So if you're an MDR customer, look at this integration to get that security control point and that beautiful use case in to give you a better outcome. If you're an MDR customer, look at that backup and just remember, this is all about visibility, really high fidelity signals to aid human investigations, a trigger, but also just a well-rounded investigation for a better outcome for our XDR customers and MDR customers.
Awesome. Well, we do have some questions. And if you haven't asked a question yet, but you've got one burning on your mind, this is a great time to ask it. But we've got a couple teed up here. So one of the first ones, we touched on this briefly, but just to make absolutely certain, someone asked, what do I need to have in order for this integration to work? If I'm a Sophos MDR customer, managed detection response customer, does it work for me? You covered that quite a bit, Dave. So the answer is yes. If I'm an XDR customer, also yes. So this is an integration that works for Sophos MDR and for Sophos XDR, which just to be clear too, is true for 99.9% of Sophos integrations are for both. So whether you are looking for a service to manage this stuff for you, or you are managing this yourself using an XDR platform, the integrations are available for both. See what else we have.
A lot of questions about how do we get it integrated? Yeah.
You also, I should just on that first question, I should also note you also have to have Veeam. So make sure you've got Veeam in place as well. And then, we make this available as an integration pack. It's part of our backup and recovery integration pack. So, feel free to reach out. And that was actually another question. So you got some people who are like, I want to get started with this integration ASAP. How do I make that happen?
Yeah. So fundamentally, XDR license or MDR license. I see a question here, Alexis. Thanks for the question. I'm an MDR customer. I've got Veeam. Perfect. So your MDR customer, Eric mentioned it. We have a backup and recovery add-on pack. So commercially, you would buy an add-on pack, backup and recovery. That covers the Veeam integration. You can set that up if you're an XDR customer and an MDR customer. There was a question about how do you set it up. So just really briefly, the customer journey would be, you get that license, you purchase the license, you put it in a Sophos Central, you'll get the tile appear in our integration section. You'll see Veeam, backup and replication, I believe the actual product is called. You will click on that tile and you'll have a really slick set of self-serve instructions of how to configure your Veeam. Again, we wrote these with Veeam, so the instructions will be updated. They'll be up to date, and it will be self-serve instructions of how to configure Veeam to push syslog into a virtual appliance that you have to deploy on the network. That hits our appliance, that gets forwarded onto the cloud. So it's via a syslog integration. All the instructions are there. We've got a good set of self-serve documentation. We also have professional services if you need help to engage for setting this thing up. But that's the license and how you set it up.
Awesome. Ray, one for you. So we've got a Sophos partner on who wants to start working with Veeam. What's the best way to reach out to you and your team and get started as a partner who's equipping customers with Veeam?
Yeah. So for that, I'd say we have an extensive partner network. So if they're a partner, do I understand that correctly? They are a partner.
Yeah. So a Sophos partner, and it sounds like they want to add Veeam to their their product portfolio?
So for that, I'd say just reach out to me directly. I'm on LinkedIn. I can put you through to the right person. Absolutely. If you're not, for customers, obviously they go to a partner. If they are a partner looking to add Veeam to the portfolio, then feel free to find me on LinkedIn. You'll see me, or however else you want to contact me, and I'll make sure I put you through to the right person there. That's
white glove service right there. That's a field CISO in action. Just reach me on LinkedIn, and I'll make the magic happen on my end. Another question from someone. So. We talked a lot about gaining visibility and having multiple different data sources reporting in so that we can take all of that data, correlate it, and have a better view of what's happening. It can be difficult to choose what data sources should I be integrating. How do I make that choice? Maybe especially if I have, almost everyone's going to have finite budget. So how do I choose what are the data sources? If I can only select a few, how do I make that decision? How do I prioritize what things I want to get visibility into? It's a good question.
Yeah, you want me to take that one?
Yeah, why don't you go first, Dave, and Ray, you can add additional color if you have some. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it comes fundamentally down sort of two things: the threat vector that's relevant for your business and the use cases. So you might every vertical, every customer is different. There's a different regulatory environment, different attack vectors, and different types of looking networks. So healthcare, manufacturing, you might have a lot of IoT requirements, at which point east-west traffic inside the perimeter becomes very important, and visibility on the network. Potentially you can't add and put Sophos devices on your machines, right? For whatever reason, old OSs or heavy IoT environment, you just can't deploy an agent. So NDR, network detection and response, is probably high up on your agenda. That's probably less relevant for someone who's, not relevant at all for someone who's a SaaS serverless type of company, right? So then it looks at, well, how do I get more information and detection capability across my platform, the platform I'm aligned to. So your AWS or your Azure environment, right? How do I get visibility? So it comes down to it's really business context. And I hate, as a cyber professional, always saying it depends, but in this case, it truly does. Vertical specific threat vector. What's the most common threat vector you're potentially susceptible to, and what are the use cases that are real for my business? Start there, and that will therefore dictate which security control is important, and therefore which telemetry you want to be feeding into your SOC.
Sorry, go ahead, Ray.
I was just I'm happy to give the CISO answer, and you've touched on this, Dave. In fact, it's the business answer. And as a CISO or the business, what are the most critical assets for the organization? If everything's shut down tomorrow, what's that most critical data? And what we see at Veeam, we're backing that up. That's the whole point. We need to back up business critical data. We're touching all of that data. So I see it from a slightly different angle there. But we do have customers that back up everything if it's not critical. But from a CISO perspective, or just from the perspective of the business, it's understanding what are the critical assets. That could be physical assets too, but obviously typically that's data. So that's where I would lean towards on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because not every organization is the same. Not every one of our clients is the same. They're going to have different needs, different objectives, and ultimately, if you can map your operational level objectives for your security program to the top line business objectives, that's the type of outcome that you're really driving toward. And we talk about these integrations, and we talk about the need to have layers and the need to have visibility, but there's also this, there are going to be limited budgets, and there will be difficult decisions that need to be made. And so the more that you can make those strategically and with the business objectives in mind, the better you're going to be, because you can invest. I mean, that's the thing. You can't just keep throwing money into cybersecurity, and I'm on the vendor side, and I'm saying that, right? So you're never going to get your risk down to zero. The goal is to get to the point where you've got the risk that you need to manage. You've agreed organizationally, this is not something that we can tolerate. And then you've got the things that you're going to say, okay, we're going to accept this risk, right? And that risk acceptance can come from a number of different inputs across the organization, right? And there's going to be other ways of mitigating risk. We've got a lot of customers, and we've got partnerships in cyber insurance where you're now sharing risk with an insurance provider. So we encourage you, have that conversation with us. We'll always provide, clarity. Have that conversation with Ray. He'll provide clarity on how do you deal with that organizational risk management piece, which is going to be essential to forming your cybersecurity strategy. I think one more question. So we've talked obviously a lot about the Veeam integration. maybe Dave, you can just give a quick overview of the other integrations that we have for Sophos MDR and Sophos XDR.
Yeah, so it's the security control points and the interesting use cases. So there's the usual suspects of firewall. Right? So network firewall is obviously a really high fidelity signal for us, and a really rich source of information. So the north, south, it's command and control, outbound beaconing. You get that from the firewall signal. Really good for investigation as well. So that's a really nice control point that again is an add-on category for us. We really position ourselves. We don't sell per vendor or we don't sell per data. It's those sort of use cases and categories of technology. So firewall, network, identity, obviously huge, right? Okta, Cisco, Duo coming in and giving us really the authentication information, identity threat detection use cases. Email, a huge attack vector, right? Phishing, obviously on top of the mind for many CISOs still, right? We're speaking about this for years and years, and it's still an effective way. And the social aspect of Gen AI, I've said the word, I know it's like we're almost finished and I dropped it. But that's where the phishing campaigns, right, sort of removes the adoption barrier for attackers. A script kiddie that speaks a different language all of a sudden can write a pretty nice phishing email. So the email security use case, a Mimecast, a proof point, a Microsoft events coming in is really interesting. And of course, backup and recovery. So that's sort of in a nutshell. I mean, we've said productivity as well, Eric. That's sort of the Amazon, the Google, the GCPs of this world, and the Microsoft. Microsoft in its own right is an absolute beast, and we cover that in the productivity pack. Of course, endpoints is also included in that. So that's in a summary all the categories we think about. And our strategy, the integrations team that we have internally, is always looking at building out new interesting categories. And that's why we're so excited about this. Actually, in fact, it was our first ever new category. We came out to market with MDR with all those existing categories. Backup and recovery is our brand new net new category. So it's really exciting. Not just a new vendor, it's a brand new category. So what you'll expect from us is more categories, more vendors in each of the categories, and also going deeper with the relationships with our vendors such as Veeam to understand the data better, to get a more well-rounded value proposition. So not just data ingestion, potentially, this is maybe a spoiler alert for roadmap. How do we get the bi-directional capability? How do we get a response action back into those third-party vendors as well? It's very much on the top of our minds and how we think about sort of integrations as a whole.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we had for questions, and I think that puts a really nice bow on today's conversation. Ray, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining and sharing some really great insight. Anyone on this webinar, reach out to Ray. Again, he's happy to have you reach out to him on LinkedIn. So find him there. I'll be happy to help you. Dave, thank you so much, as always, for sharing your perspective on MDR and XDR. And same thing goes for you, right? You're constantly connecting with people. If you want to reach Dave, just show up at his house. He'll be happy to host you, and you guys can grab a drink and he'll have a good time. So
absolutely.
With that, we'll wrap things up. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this webinar whenever you're watching it. And we hope to see you at the next webcast soon. Be on the lookout for the link of this recording. And again, please do reach out if you have any questions or if there's anything we can do to help. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.